They showed up in a golf cart with flashing yellow lights duct taped to the roof, and the words HOA Enforcement Unit stenciled on the side in crooked letters. I was standing barefoot on my dock, coffee in hand, when I saw them rolling up like they were about to serve a federal warrant. That was the moment I knew this was going to be another one of those mornings. The ringleader, Karen of course, was a middle-aged woman named Marlene Witherspoon. Short, stiff blonde hair that looked like it was lacquered on, sunglasses too big for her face, and that ever-present HOA clipboard clutched like a holy relic. She waved her arms at me like I was a plane she was trying to land. Jacob Whitmore," she shouted from the end of my gravel driveway. "We've issued multiple citations regarding the unsanctioned watercraft on HOA property." I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "You mean my boat?" "Yes, your boat," she snapped, storming toward the dock like she owned the shoreline. Some guy followed behind her, a wiry weasel-looking guy in an oversized polo with HOA Patrol written in glitter paint on the back. He was dragging a tow hitch with him. You can't just dock a boat on HOA land without proper registration and approval. I raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about my lake." Marlene stopped. "Excuse me, this dock, that water, the shoreline from that tree line to the red marker, all mine, private property. Deeded and recorded 10 years ago. You'd know that if you bothered to read anything besides your own citations." She blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Well, the HOA has jurisdiction over community appearances, and that rusty eyesore is bringing down property values." "She's a 92 Crown Line and she runs like a dream," I said. "And again, not on HOA land." That's when the guy with the glitter shirt tried to loop a tow chain around the trailer that held the boat. I stepped off the dock, set my mug down, and walked straight up to him. "Touch that trailer again and you'll be trespassing," I said. "And I'll call the sheriff," Marlene huffed. "We're allowed to enforce compliance, it's in the bylaws." I pulled out a folder I kept in the boathouse for exactly this reason. "Here's the surveyor's map, the deed, and the property lines. You want to test it, go ahead. But you're not towing anything today." That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't, not with Marlene. She yanked out a walkie-talkie and muttered something about proceeding with action. 2 hours later, I found out what that meant. I was replacing a fuel line when I heard the beeping of a tow truck backing down the gravel path to the lake. A real tow truck this time, not HOA golf cart theater. The driver hopped out, confused as hell. "You Jacob Whitmore?" "I am." He scratched his head. "Got a service call to collect a boat from this address. Came through some HOA dispatch line." I laughed. "You're not touching that boat." He looked at the lake. "Wait, that thing's in the water, docked on my private shoreline. And if you try dragging it out of there, that's theft and property damage. You ready for that?" He stepped back. "Nope, not even a little." Marlene came storming back down the path, waving a paper in the air like it was the Constitution. "I have authority." "No, you don't," I said, stepping between her and the tow truck. "You overstepped. Again." She jabbed a finger at me. "You're going to regret this, Jacob. You think you're clever, but the board is already reviewing your non-compliance." I didn't respond. I just pointed to the "No Trespassing Private Property" sign posted clearly at the entrance to the dock. Then I turned and walked back to the boat. She wasn't going to let this go. I could see it in her eyes. But what Marlene didn't know was that my security cameras had caught everything from her fake patrol to the illegal tow attempt. And I wasn't just going to defend my lake. I was going to take the whole rotten HOA down. The following morning, I drove into town with a USB drive in my glove box and a purpose in my chest. The footage from my security cameras was crisp. Marlene ordering a tow without legal authority, her assistant attempting to chain up personal property, and the tow truck driver backing off when I confronted him with the truth. It was all there, every action, every word. I parked outside the county clerk's office, not because I had something to prove, but because I knew exactly what game they were playing now. It wasn't about the boat, it was about control. They were testing boundaries, seeing what they could get away with. The problem was, they picked the wrong shoreline. Inside, I asked to speak with Deputy Clerk Hill. She'd helped me once before when I was finalizing the purchase of my lakefront plot. I handed her the USB and the printed copies of the deed, the surveyor's report, and a notarized affidavit confirming the boundaries. She plugged in the drive, watched the footage, and her face tightened. "That's impersonating law enforcement," she said. "They called themselves an enforcement unit," I replied. "Had a fake patrol vehicle and everything. Tried to seize private property without a warrant or court order. That's not a misunderstanding. That's premeditated." She nodded slowly, then picked up her phone and dialed. "Sheriff, Donnelly needs to see this." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the sheriff's office. Donnelly was a stocky man with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. "You've got a lot here, Jacob," he said, clicking through the footage. "That woman's stepping way out of line. She authorized a tow on land she doesn't control," I pointed to the timestamp. "And she didn't even bother to check the boundaries. She assumed the HOA had jurisdiction because they're used to nobody pushing back." He leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like criminal trespass, attempted theft, and possibly impersonating a peace officer depending how she represented herself. You got that clipboard? Right here," I said, placing it on his desk. I'd pulled it from the ground after she left it behind in her fury. It had a fake compliance order stamped with a seal that looked suspiciously like the county's official one. He examined it, then raised an eyebrow. "This seal's not just fake, it's a copy of ours." "That's a felony." That afternoon, a deputy delivered a cease and desist letter to the HOA office, an old converted pool house with dusty windows and a faded bulletin board out front. Marlene wasn't there. But the moment the letter hit her desk, I knew she'd come storming back like a thundercloud. Sure enough, the next morning, while I was resealing the dock planks, I heard gravel crunching. Marlene arrived in a different vehicle this time. A white SUV with magnetic signs slapped on the door that read Community Oversight and Safety Liaison. She stepped out wearing heels too fancy for the terrain and a jacket that tried too hard to look official. "You're escalating this," she snapped, striding toward me with a folder in hand. "No," I said, not looking up. "You escalated it when you tried to steal from me." She slapped the folder onto my workbench. "We've initiated a special review panel to evaluate your compliance with community harmony standards. You'll be required to appear," I chuckled. "Community harmony. Is that in the bylaws?" She stiffened. "It's an emergency clause under Section 18 granted to the board in times of disruption." I opened the folder. It was a joke. A list of made-up infractions. Visual disharmony, non-congruent shoreline modifications, excessive private use of shared visual space. It was bureaucratic fiction. "This has no legal standing," I said, flipping through the pages. "It does in this community," she hissed. I stepped toward her. "Not on my property, it doesn't. And if you show up again trying to enforce made-up rules with fake uniforms, you're going to be dealing with more than a sheriff's deputy." She turned on her heel and stomped off. But this time, she wasn't just angry, she was nervous. Her bluff had been called, and now she was scrambling. What she didn't know was that I'd already submitted the footage and documentation to the county prosecutor. And I wasn't the only one. Turns out, I wasn't the only homeowner with stories about Marlene's pretend patrols. Later that week, I met with 3 other residents at a local diner, people I'd never really talked to before. Angela, who lived across the lake, Robert, a retired machinist with a garage full of classic cars, and Maya, a nurse who worked nights and had been fined for excessive driveway usage. All 3 had been harassed. All 3 had documentation. Angela leaned across the table. "She tried to fine me for my shutters not matching the street aesthetic. My house doesn't even face the street." Robert nodded. "They tried to tow my '69 Mustang, said it was abandoned. It was parked in my garage with the door open." Maya stirred her tea. She left a notice on my windshield while I was working a double said I had vehicle fatigue presence. I had no idea what that even meant. We pooled our documents, timelines, and footage. I drafted a formal complaint and submitted it to the county attorney's office, along with a request for an audit of the HOA's enforcement practices. But we didn't stop there. I contacted Channel 7's investigative reporter, Leela Tran. She was known for going after local corruption like a bloodhound. I handed her everything, the fake citations, the footage, the bogus patrol uniforms, and the altered seal. Her eyes lit up. "This could be a whole series," she said. "People love stories about fake power." Within days, she was knocking on doors, rolling cameras, asking questions. Interviews with residents, footage of HOA patrols driving around with clipboards, and a deep dive into how the board had rewritten the bylaws without a proper vote. It aired that Friday, and the fallout was immediate. The sheriff's department launched an investigation into the impersonation of public officials. The county attorney filed charges for unauthorized use of a government emblem. And the HOA board, they scattered like birds from a busted feeder. Marlene tried to defend herself on camera, claiming she was restoring order and preserving neighborhood values. But the footage didn't lie. Neither did the documents. And when Leela revealed that the HOA had spent over $30,000 on enforcement initiatives that included golf carts, uniforms, and custom signage without approval from residents, the community erupted. An emergency meeting was called. This time, not by the board, but by the residents. Over 100 people showed up at the community center. And for the first time in years, the power flowed in the other direction. Angela stood up first. "We trusted this board to manage landscaping and pool maintenance, not to play sheriff." Robert followed. "They've been inventing rules to fund their pet projects. That's not governance, that's a scam." I waited until the end to speak. "They tried to take my boat, that's how this started. Not because it was loud or dangerous or illegal, but because it reminded them they don't control everything. That's what this was always about." A motion was made to dissolve the current board. It passed without a single dissenting vote. A new election was scheduled for the following week, with nominations taken on the spot from the floor. Maya leaned over after the vote. "You know you're getting elected, right?" I shook my head. "I just wanted them to stop pretending they were above the law," she grinned. "Well, congratulations. You made them look like clowns in front of half the county." "That's a start." And as I walked out of the center that night, I heard someone shout from the back, "Hey Jacob, that boat's still floatin'?" I raised my hand without turning. Like a dream. The morning after the vote, I was back on my dock tightening the new cleats I'd installed along the edge when a county vehicle pulled up near the tree line. I recognized the man who stepped out, Assistant District Attorney Philip Harmon. He was the kind of guy who never looked hurried, even when he probably should be. Clean suit, rolled sleeves, and a clipboard that actually had a reason to exist. "You Whitmore?" he asked. "Still am," I said, standing and brushing off my hands. He looked out at the lake, then at the dock beneath his feet. "You've got quite the setup here, quiet, peaceful." "It was," I said, "until someone tried to turn it into a boot camp." He cracked a faint grin and handed me a document. "This is an official notice of investigation. We're looking into the financial practices of your HOA board. Based on the audit request you and the others submitted, we've already found probable cause to dig deeper." I skimmed the page. "How deep are we talking?" "They filed for tax-exempt status as a nonprofit," he said. "But they've been contracting private security under the table using funds collected through unauthorized fines. That's a violation of both state HOA regulations and federal nonprofit disclosure laws." I let that sink in. So they weren't just power tripping. They were laundering money. "Not in the traditional sense," Harmon said, "but the way they funneled resident dues through shell accounts to pay for their little patrol setups. That's wire fraud, and possibly embezzlement depending on who signed off." I gestured toward the path. "You want to talk to the others. We've got a whole binder of documents waiting, he nodded. Already visited Angela and Robert. Maya's on shift at the hospital right now, but she sent us her statements. He paused, lowering his voice. We also executed a search warrant at the HOA's office this morning. Found a locked cabinet with files labeled Incident Control and Compliance Targets. I raised an eyebrow. Targets? Residents they plan to single out, Harmon said. One of them was you. I'm flattered, I said dryly. What else? They had photographs, surveillance logs, even a map with houses marked in red, yellow, and green. You were red, by the way, I shook my head. So they were running an actual intimidation campaign. That's what it looks like, he said grimly. And here's the worst part, some of those funds were diverted from maintenance budgets. It means they knowingly neglected infrastructure to bankroll their own enforcement theater. I looked toward the newly replaced lamp posts along the main road. Half of them had been installed by volunteers after the HOA claimed they couldn't afford replacements. You're going to charge them? We already have Marlene in custody, Harmon said. Picked her up at her house this morning. She tried to claim the HOA was a quasi-governmental agency with inherent authority. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. That'll play well in court, he nodded. She'll be arraigned tomorrow. Her second-in-command, the guy with the glitter patrol shirt, his name's Dennis Lyles, is under investigation for impersonating law enforcement. He tried to present a badge when the search team arrived. I blinked. He made himself a badge, brass-plated plastic, Harmon said. Said community authority officer, he tried to flash it at a deputy. Didn't go well. I sat down on the edge of the dock. So what happens next? With the HOA? They're suspended indefinitely, Harmon said. The county's appointing a temporary receiver to manage the basics, trash pickup, utilities, that kind of thing. After the trial, the residents can vote to dissolve it completely or reform it under county oversight. I nodded slowly. That's going to be a hell of a meeting. Harmon turned to leave, then paused. You did the right thing, Whitmore. Most people just pay the fines and grumble. You stood up and pulled the curtain back. I didn't do it alone, I said, but yeah. Feels good to breathe again. As he drove off, I walked back toward the house, passing the patch of gravel where the tow truck had once backed in. That scar in the ground was still there, a reminder of how far they'd tried to go. Later that afternoon, Maya stopped by after her shift, still in scrubs and holding a large envelope. Got this in my mailbox, she said, handing it to me. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a stack of photos, close-ups of her car, her driveway, even her living room window taken from the street. Each one was dated and labeled with strange internal codes. Subject 4B, nighttime movement. Subject 4B, vehicle absence 48 HRS. Maya sat down on my porch steps, staring at the last image. I thought I was being paranoid, but they were actually tracking me. You're not the only one, I said. Angela had similar photos. Robert found tire marks in his backyard he never could explain. She looked up. I want to testify. You will, I said. And not just for us, for everyone who's been bullied into silence. That evening, we held a neighborhood gathering on the lawn outside the community center. No microphones, no stage, just people, dozens of them bringing lawn chairs, coolers, and stories. Not complaints, testimonies. A man I'd never met before, tall and quiet with a prosthetic leg, stood up first. I'm a veteran, moved here for peace. They cited me for flying the flag outside regulation hours. A single mother said she'd been fined for having non-conforming window curtains. Another woman said her daughter wasn't allowed to sell lemonade because it wasn't an approved commercial activity. As the stories poured out, something shifted in the air. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. What remained was resolve. The county's appointed receiver, a no-nonsense woman named Dina Carson, arrived halfway through, clipboard under her arm. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When the crowd quieted, she stepped forward. I've managed 7 HOA transitions, she said, but I've never seen one where the residents were this united. That tells me something important. The problem wasn't the model. It was who was holding the reins. She promised transparency, monthly reports, and most importantly, a vote within 90 days on whether to keep or scrap the HOA entirely. After the meeting, Angela approached me with a tired smile. "You know what I realized tonight," she said. "They were terrified of losing control. That's why they pushed so hard, but they never had real power, just the illusion of it." I nodded. "They couldn't handle the fact that people might just want to live their lives without being monitored." That night, back on my dock, I watched the lights across the lake flicker on one by one. No more patrols, no more clipboard threats, just neighbors finally at ease. The lake was still. The boat bobbed gently, tied down with new cleats and surrounded by silence. Not the suffocating kind, but the honest kind, the kind that comes after a storm passes and the air feels fresh again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't look over my shoulder. I looked up. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paper, like secrets finally being dragged into daylight. Rows of wooden pews filled up fast, mostly with neighbors, but dotted throughout were reporters, county officials, and a few unfamiliar faces in cheap suits. The gallery buzzed, low and steady, the way a crowd sounds when they're waiting for fireworks to start. Marlene sat at the defense table, shoulders drawn so tight her blazer creased in the wrong places. She didn't look up when I walked in. Her lawyer, a wiry man with a mustache that twitched every time he blinked, flipped through notes like he was hoping something useful would appear between the lines. Across from them, the assistant district attorney, Harmon, stood calm, hands behind his back, watching the judge settle in. I took a seat near the front, Maya beside me, still in her navy blazer from work, and Robert just behind us, arms folded, jaw set. Angela sat at the end of the pew, flipping through a spiral-bound folder filled with printed emails and screenshots. "All rise," the bailiff said. We did. Judge Callahan was the kind of man whose presence filled a room before he even spoke. Former military, silver hair, no nonsense. He didn't care who you were or what board you chaired, he only cared about the law. "Be seated," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's get to it." Harmon began with a summary of the charges: impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful use of government insignia, attempted theft of private property, and misuse of community funds. But it didn't stop there. They'd uncovered much more. Turns out, the HOA hadn't just funded fake patrols. They'd created a covert reimbursement scheme that funneled money through a landscaping contractor who didn't exist. That contractor had an address, a website, even a phone number, but no actual equipment. No employees, and no license. The company's bank records, obtained through subpoena, tied directly back to Marlene's personal checking account. Over $32,000 diverted over 14 months. "Let's see if I understand this correctly," Judge Callahan said, staring over the rim of his glasses. "You fabricated a vendor, issued payments for non-existent services, and deposited those funds into an account you controlled." Marlene's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client believed the account was part of a community initiative fund. She was led to believe," Harmon cut in. "We have emails, Your Honor. She set up the entity herself, listed her own address on the Articles of Incorporation, and signed every check." The judge's gavel came down once sharp. "That's enough. We'll move to witness testimony." They started with the tow truck driver, a lanky man in his 40s who looked uncomfortable in a tie. He confirmed he was called by someone claiming to be from a regulatory enforcement unit. When he asked for paperwork, he was told it would be provided upon arrival and compliance. Then came Maya. She took the stand, steady and measured. She described the photos, the coded reports, the feeling of being watched. The prosecutor entered the surveillance images into evidence, and the courtroom went silent as each one appeared on the monitor. Grainy shots taken through bushes, over fences, from parked cars at odd hours of the night. Angela followed. She described being fined for architectural violations that only existed in an unpublished addendum to the bylaws. She'd requested a copy of the amendment and been told it was for board eyes only. Then Harmon called me. I walked to the stand, met the judge's eyes, and swore in. "Tell us what happened on the morning of April 3rd. I recounted it from the start: the fake patrol vehicle, the clipboard, the fabricated citations, and the attempted tow. I explained the boundary lines, the deed, the property markers. I handed over the footage, time-stamped and unaltered, showing Marlene directing Dennis to chain up my trailer. "Were you ever given any legal documentation authorizing the tow?" "No." "Did you ever receive any formal hearing notice from the HOA regarding your boat?" "No." "Did anyone from the board ever acknowledge that the shoreline in question was not under HOA jurisdiction? They ignored it every time I brought it up." Harmon nodded, then played the footage for the court. The screen showed Marlene gesturing to the boat, shouting something about non-compliance, while Dennis looped a chain around the trailer hitch. "You believe they knew they were on private property when this happened?" Harmon asked. "I don't believe they cared," I said. The defense tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding, a miscommunication between the board and the residents, a bureaucratic slip, but too many pieces didn't add up: the fake contractor, the surveillance, the falsified citations, the fake badge. The turning point came when the prosecution revealed a voice recording. It was from a board meeting one held in secret, without public notice. Marlene's voice was unmistakable. "If we make an example of Whitmore," she said, "the others will fall in line. We can't have people thinking they're outside the system just because of a few property lines." The courtroom went still. Even her lawyer's mustache stopped twitching. Judge Callahan leaned forward. "I think we've heard enough," he called a recess. When he returned, he didn't waste words. "Marlene Witherspoon, you are hereby found guilty on all counts before this court. Sentencing will be announced pending further investigation into the financial misconduct. Bail is revoked. You will be remanded into county custody immediately." The gavel fell again. Dennis, who'd been seated in the back, tried to slip out unnoticed. He didn't make it past the second row before two deputies stopped him. They escorted him out without a word. Outside the courthouse, the sun was high and the air felt like relief. Reporters swarmed, but most of us just stood there, quiet, taking it in. Angela turned to me. "You think it's really over?" "No," I said. "But the worst part is." Later that week, the county receiver held another community meeting. This time it was celebratory. The residents voted overwhelmingly to dissolve the HOA entirely. No restructuring, no rebranding, just gone. In its place, a volunteer neighborhood committee would form, not to enforce rules, but to coordinate cleanups, plan events, and keep things running smoothly. No dues, no patrols. Just people looking out for each other. Robert offered to help rebuild the community dock. Maya volunteered to manage the new neighborhood message board. Angela started organizing monthly potlucks at the park. As for me, I went back to my routine. Early mornings on the dock, coffee in hand, the lake calm and undisturbed. The boat sat where it belonged, tied to my cleats, untouched. No more golf carts with flashing lights, no more fake badges, no more clipboards. Just water, wind, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing we'd taken back what was ours. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with truth, and a paper trail that didn't lie.